Well, let's talk about spanking, shall we?
Do we have to? Do we have to talk about spanking again? These guys love to talk about spanking. And we're going to talk about spanking again today because they have hundreds of thousands of people following them, and they released an episode, once again, all about spanking. So let's talk about it. Hi, I'm Marissa Franks-Burt, the co-author of The Myth of Good Christian Parenting, How False Promises Betrayed a Generation of Evangelical Families. In our book, we trace the history and development of popular Christian parenting teaching over the past 50 years. We reviewed over 100 resources, print media, podcast episodes like this, as well as interviewed families, older parents reflecting back, adult children reflecting back on what it was like in how this impacted their lives. We discussed the recurring themes across these resources, including spanking. We have a whole chapter on spanking because this is a hill a lot of Christian parents want to die on. And it's probably the topic I've spoken about, written about the most on social media. You can find articles on my Substack. You can find playlists here on YouTube. You can find highlights on Instagram, because this is something parents will double and triple down on. And I will continue to talk about it for a couple of reasons. One, because I hear regularly from Christian parents who were conflicted about spanking, heard messages like this and felt stuck, felt coerced themselves into spanking, and have found freedom through content that I and others have produced. So I'll continue talking about it. I also will talk about it because this kind of teaching that Cross Politic is offering enables abuse directly and indirectly in countless homes, and children can't advocate for themselves. They need adults to advocate for them. They need Christian adults in Christian communities to say no. No, that is not biblical. That is not Christian. To say no, to repent of the ways our Christian teaching has enabled abuse of all kinds. So I'm here today to once again talk about spanking. What are we watching here? I'm not going to do a full live reaction because there are things like 30 minutes long, and I just don't want to do that. I don't like to give them platform or increased reach, but they have a lot of reach. It matters. They have thousands of families listening to their bad parenting advice. So I'm going to respond to a couple different clips here. Read the book if you want to know more. Who are these people? Okay. Cross Politic is a podcast produced out of Moscow, Idaho, part of Doug Wilson's outfit. Doug Wilson is a pastor who's been around for decades. He's an avowed Christian nationalist. He has a lot of influence in certain circles. He's involved in classical Christian homeschooling. He writes and speaks a lot. He has a lot of books. He has a lot of family life resources. A lot of people go to that community drawn by family life teaching, marriage teaching, and parenting teaching. This is not a new topic for them. They talk about spanking a lot. They defend spanking a lot. Let's see what they have to say today.
Rachel was visiting a friend. She's probably 3 or 4 in that fourth school age. And our neighbor had little kids. And so we would trade back and forth. So I went over to pick her up. And when I walked in, she said, "Oh, is it time to go?" So I thought, perfect opportunity. I got her home. I didn't address it there. But I did give her spanking. It's true.
We got some nice, chipper, whimsical music. I'm just going to note here.
I did. But I just said, when I come in, you're going to say, "Hi, Mom." That's how we do this. So the next time she went over there, I did the review. Now remember, when I come, you're going to say, "Hi, Mom." You're not going to say, "Oh, I didn't want to go." So it was beautiful, because then when I picked her up, it was just all that, yes, Mom is here at last. Yeah.
And the interwebs went berserk.
Okay, so something I think Toby and Doug and Nancy still don't understand is that the interwebs didn't go berserk because a boomer mom was talking about spanking her toddler, right? Most boomer parents spanked their kids. The interweb went berserk because this is a mom who's laughing about it, who sees it as beautiful, and who is excited for the opportunity, first of all. Second of all, they're responding to the scenario, which is a young child expressing disappointment for leaving a fun activity, which is a pretty normal human experience. And the parental response was not to help them navigate those emotions, to teach them maybe a different response. I don't think people are objecting to that. I think they're objecting to the default to conditioning a child into an emotional response, and then to conditioning a child into pretending to be cheerful when they see their mom. Because I think most parents would not really see that as a desirable end goal, to say, gosh, I really want my child to act like they're happy to see me because they're afraid of getting a spanking. Like that's something I would value in my parenting. I think most parents don't resonate with that. They would hope that their child would be genuinely glad to see them because they have a connected, healthy relationship with their child. So I think they still are missing why so many people are responding. And I think that really speaks to something about the norms in the community, because this idea of choosing joy is woven throughout Moscow. They call it the Moscow mood. You can hear it in the things they talk about, with this kind of like chosen cheerful joviality. It's almost like cosplaying some view of like a Chestertonian cheerfulness. And it comes out in interesting ways like this, where they've chosen to put whimsical music behind a clip of a mom talking about spanking her young child. Because whatever you think about that, that's not really like a whimsical moment. And so there's a discordant note sometimes when they talk about things because of this element of forced cheerfulness that would like if we all pretend louder that we're happy and doing well and cheerful, that will somehow make it so. And it's just not the case. But you see it across the board. It's not just in their parenting content. I also want to note that this is a bit for Doug and Nancy. They have told this story 3 or 4 times across social media. I found different clips. She pauses at the same spot. She looks for laughter. Doug will chime in at different times. They have certain stories they tell about them spanking their children that they pull out and kind of expect laughter from the audience or expect a certain response. So I do think it perhaps was surprising to them when it escaped, as things do on the internet outside of their usual bubble, to a wider audience. And people were not laughing. People did not find it amusing, and people objected strongly to it. They didn't like that. And in kind of a maybe unsurprising twist, they end up making Nancy the victim of people who disagreed with this parenting approach, as we will see in the next little bit.
This is going to be a doozy.
3.1 million views on X, viral on TikTok, and even Newsweek picked it up.
Many outraged responses called it child abuse, called for Mrs. Wilson to be locked up and her children taken away.
Accusations of assault, even death threats. And I'm thinking a generation ago, this was normal. You have a grandma that's quoting Proverbs telling young mothers to discipline their kids, and now it's national news. And now it's
This response from them is really interesting to me because this original clip was in one of my threads on Twitter. So I saw this whole thing play out a couple years ago. And what they failed to mention here is that they really capitalized on this moment. I don't think they were deeply offended that it had 3 million eyeballs on it. I think they were excited, and they continued to retweet. Toby started a hashtag called SpankingGate, where he continued to post kind of brashly being like, yeah, we love spanking. We have spanking rooms in our churches, to get more clicks. I mean, this is part of the Moscow mood as well. In fact, someone at that time in their marketing department saw such an opportunity. They sent out this email to their subscribers saying, oh, like for the low price, you can get this discounted bundle of all Doug Wilson's parenting teaching. So you can find the secret sauce. There's been no apostasy in his family, et cetera, et cetera. Now, Doug later, remarkably, during No Quarter November, where he says he never apologizes for anything, apologized for this and retracted it because even he said it was prosperity gospel promise. I think probably because he got a lot of pushback from within his own community. I don't think they care if there's pushback from the wider community. Obviously, they springboard on that for more marketing. But within their own community, they do care because those are the people they don't want to lose. So I think this is interesting that here we're getting a little bit of a Darvo, like, oh, it was Nancy was really the victim here. No, Nancy, this is teaching Nancy has done as a bit for decades at seminars. It went viral. They capitalized on it, probably made more money from it, and are resurrecting it here when they see an opportune moment in this political climate to get even more clicks. So, but I do think the kind of brash response that is Moscow's typical brash response isn't just about being grifty and getting more clicks. I think it also has a thought-stopping effect for the people within the community. Because if you're a parent who maybe moved to Moscow because you found something appealing there, or maybe you listen to their streaming content, you listen to Rachel or somebody else, and you're trying to do it right. Like, you want to get parenting right. You love the Lord. You want to do this the Christian way. And but you don't feel good about spanking. Like, something inside you doesn't feel right. It doesn't seem to be working with your child. You feel out of control, perhaps, any number of things. When something like this happens, and when your leaders and your community double down brashly and kind of like step into that, we like it when people oppose us mood, it really does short circuit any critical thinking. So I think it's really unfortunate for the people within the community, because these moments, they may be wanting to reconsider, but this whole kind of cultural, like, we just cheerfully own this without apology, means nobody's ever reflecting. Nobody ever has anything to learn. I think they probably were pretty pleased to be featured in Newsweek. I don't think that was troubling to them. Okay, let's see what else they are going to say here.
Even dangerous.
And perhaps most surprisingly, many of these reactions came from professing Christians.
I don't know why he gives a little like, what could this mean clip. Yeah, lots of Christians don't think you need to spank your kids.
Okay.
As Doug Wilson said in response to the whole ruckus,
it is time for us to say out loud what really needs to happen. A very large number of our evangelical leaders need to become Christians. Am I questioning their salvation? Well, yes.
I mean, how do you even respond to this? I cannot take this seriously. Like, be so for real, you guys. Like, spanking children is not like a requirement of Christianity. Like, you can't make a biblical case for this. You can't make a theological case for this. You can't even make a historical case for this. This is just nonsense. And if you do want me to take it seriously, it is adding to the gospel. And out of all the things you could choose to try and add to the gospel, like the gospel plus hitting small children has to be one of the worst. So, like, be so for real. No.
But something changed in our society. In 2 generations, the West abandoned 3,000 years of wisdom about raising children. But the outrage over that clip tells us something else. It reveals just how far that we've drifted from our foundation, and just how expensive that drift has cost us.
Here comes the social panic. This is really normal. We saw this again and again across decades. The ingredients changed. Like, what was perceived as the current social crisis of the moment changed. But this framing that there is a social crisis that needs to be laid at the feet of parents who parented wrong is a really common formula in these resources, because then the expert is about to say, hey, I got the solution. I'm going to tell you how to parent right, which is going to not only get the results you want in your family, it's going to change society. It can maybe even save the nation. You know what I mean? It takes the stakes to that level. It's very, very common. You can see it across all the resources. They're not really doing anything new here, but they're going to put in the things that they find and that they're really more likely their audience finds particularly scary in this moment, and pitch that as a lever of like why you should listen to our parenting advice. It's very effective.
Prisons are overflowing.
Okay, let's talk about prisons, because this comes up all the time with spanking defenders. And I don't know how you could get at this, but I guarantee you, if you talk to incarcerated people, they were spanked as children. I guarantee you are not going to find a majority of incarcerated people saying there wasn't corporal punishment in my home. And again, there's a presupposition that there's no way to prove this, that spanking more would somehow result in less incarceration. Like, I don't know why I'm supposed to believe that claim, but it's just going to be kind of rapid fire here. And it's appealing to parents because, yeah, no parent wants their child to be incarcerated. Dobson did this. He was one of the first to kind of talk about juvenile delinquency and to pull on that lever of parental fear and be like, you don't want that to happen? You better get disciplined right in the first 5 years so that doesn't happen. That was Dobson's shtick, and it was very lucrative. And so you just see Wilson downstream of that doing the same thing.
Nursing homes have become warehouses for our elderly, and churches are emptying.
Okay, yeah, churches are emptying. I think it's really for Christians who care about that, I think it's a good idea to listen to what they're saying. Because a lot of them are saying dogmatic high control teaching is the reason they're exiting. Abuse, the failure to respond to abuse is the reason they're exiting. A number of them talk about family life teaching as being what I would call huge stumbling blocks for their ability to continue to relate to God as an adult, because a lot of this teaching came wrapped up with catechesis about what God is like. Many evangelical families are experiencing inauthentic connection and estrangement, in large part due to parenting philosophies like this, because what parents are practicing day in and day out is training themselves up. And guess what? If you as a parent have trained yourself up to expect a cheerful countenance from your child, to expect instant obedience from your child, to spank them if you don't get that, many children will put on a cheerful face, whether out of survival or because they don't want to get spanked or because they're trained into it. So it can be a really rude awakening for parents who have trained themselves to expect that and told themselves that was authentic, down the road to discover, no, that wasn't authentic, that that kind of corporal punishment, that kind of interaction damaged their relationship. It destroyed attachment. It broke trust. And that the cheerful compliance they were witnessing was conditioned compliance. It wasn't authentic connection. And that as soon as their children have autonomy and are able to reclaim that autonomy, they will either completely exit the relationship and go no or low contact, or they will exert that autonomy. And then the parent will discover that they never learned any tools other than expected compliance. They missed out on their own parental development through all those years of parenting, where they could have learned to see and relate to the child as another human being in front of them. They were conditioning themselves to expect instant compliance. And it leads to a lot of inauthentic connection and estrangement down the road. So yeah, it would be wise to observe that and maybe get curious about that, rather than land at some impossible to prove assumption that people are leaving the church because they weren't spanked enough.
Whole generation of parents are so paralyzed by the fear of doing some kind of harm that they've stopped parenting altogether.
The Bible says, folly is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline drives it far from him. Proverbs 22:15.
This is not a video about spanking, although we're going to talk a lot about spanking. But this video is about something bigger.
Okay, that's weird. The video is titled Spank Your Kids, Save America. Okay, let's talk about that Proverbs. I got a lot of highlights on this. So the real quick version is Proverbs are not imperatives. They are a collection of wisdom sayings that relies on imagery from daily life in the ancient Near East. That does not mean we should try and replicate daily life in the ancient Near East. The wise person reading Proverbs is to extract wisdom, right? We don't lay our tables with knives so we can put them to our throat if we're given to gluttony. We don't smack people in the mouth if they speak foolishly. We don't read those as imperatives. We understand them to be saying something about a principle for us to apply the wisdom in our own life. They're not checklists. They're not mandates. So the proverb Toby is talking about here, the importance here is that wise parents will discipline their children, teach, correct, instruct, train, disciple. And foolish ones will neglect to do that, and wise sons will listen to parental discipline. It is not that you need to replicate ancient Near East practices of discipline in your own home. Now, there are a couple of ways you can approach this verse if you do want to say, well, okay, Marissa, but I kind of want to obey this verse anyway. I want to read it as a mandate. Okay, well, you still have some interpretive work to do, because a literal application would be to take a thick, stout club that was used on the backs of enslaved or imprisoned people and to probably in public cane the backs of your teenage sons, your really rebellious teenage sons, with this stick. What it is not literally is hitting preschoolers and toddlers on their bottoms with a wooden spoon or your hand. It's just not. That would not be a literal interpretation. There's other biblical imagery for the rod. There's the shepherd's rod. There is the rod of a ruler, like a king or scepter, like when the king extends his scepter to Esther. Like, it doesn't make sense to use any of these things literally. The idea is that wise parents will discipline. And for the Christian, Jesus is our hermeneutic. I think all of Scripture is consistent and useful for teaching, correction, reproving, and instruction in righteousness. I think, though, we always, as a Christian, we look through the lens of the life and ministry of Jesus. We do not cherry pick verses from 3,000 years ago and say, this is the one on which we're going to hang everything. Like the parenting choices we make as Christian parents, there's tremendous freedom regarding methodology because there's not explicit freed. There's not explicit instruction. The only direct instruction given to Christian parents, repeated twice in the New Testament, is fathers, do not embitter or provoke your children to anger. In Ephesians 6 is followed up with, but bring them up in the instruction and discipline of the Lord. So whatever methodology we choose, that is the direct imperative to Christian parents. And I would argue that Christian practices of spanking absolutely embitter and provoke children to anger. They're almost designed to do it. So that alone should rule it out. But we also have all the one anothering verses of the New Testament. Be kind, be compassionate, be forbearing, restore the ones who sin gently, as well as the life and example of Jesus, who had strong words for adults whose activities that would hurt children or cause them to stumble in their faith. Things that we see as the direct fruit of this kind of Christian teaching. So all of that needs to be taken into account. We can't just look at one verse that is intended to cultivate wisdom using the imagery of the ancient Near East and be like, well, in the past 50 years, we came to understand this to mean, taking a child somewhere private, praying with them and hitting them on their bottom. Therefore, that's what the author of Proverbs meant. No, that's poor exegesis, it's poor hermeneutics, and it's poor application. And it's really kept a lot of families stuck because there is a way to heed the wisdom of the Proverbs without feeling like you need to obey these made-up spanking rules that were largely invented in spanking manuals from the 1970s. Now, a word about that, because as they note, yes, spanking has been practiced across human history because humans throughout history have always beaten people they viewed as property, whether that be enslaved people, captives, imprisoned people, or children. And children were not seen as fully human. I mean, this conversation, there have always been people who have objected to spanking. You can see Christians in the Victorian era. You can see Christians from 100 years ago objecting to spanking. They've been a minority, but they've been there. But really, in the past 100 years, as we've changing conversations around human rights and the rights of children, you begin to say, well, why? Would we treat anyone else this way? Would we say it's okay to hit a cognitively impaired person to get them to do what you want? Would we say if you have an elderly parent who's struggling with dementia and they can't cognitively understand your commands, it's okay to hit them into compliance? And we begin to see, we have a different standard for how we relate to children because we don't view them as fully human. That's really a shame that Christians would fall into that camp and continue to view children as subhuman, because Jesus himself says, whoever welcomes a young child in my name welcomes me. And there is a very real sense that how we treat children says something about how we treat Jesus. Jesus identifies with the child, with a vulnerable child in the Gospels. So anyway, all that to say, the rod Proverbs and Hebrews 12, I'm pretty sure they'll go to Hebrews 12, get thrown around a lot. I think it's worth noting that Doug Wilson himself agrees that the rod Proverbs need not equal spanking. That's not necessarily true. So I wonder how Knox and Toby would respond to that, because Wilson himself has said that he's willing to grant that. So at a certain point, if you're making up rules for people to follow, why would you double down on hitting children unless you are so impoverished in your understanding that is the only thing you can do, that you really can't think of an ethical alternative? And that's really unfortunate. And I think a failure of imagination and a chosen willful ignorance at this point. Anyway, let's see what else. I'm going to skip through this part because I think they have a lot of retro, mythologized American history images that come up here to kind of talk about the good old days when everyone, I guess, was doing it right, which we have no way of knowing, and what they were doing and how we should get back to them, which it's interesting because you go back, every generation is doing this. You go back to the 90s and you see Ted Tripp and Gary Ezzo lamenting the previous generation of parents for failing, for the drift. You go back to Dobson, he's saying the same thing 50 years ago. The footage they are offering now, Dobson in 1970 is saying the same thing. We've become so lax. We have lost discipline. We need to get back to discipline. So either Dobson and others were lying about what they were doing, or this is just a mythical past. The last widespread survey done among American parents, the majority of them are still relying on corporal punishment. About 10 years ago, majority still own up. This is just the ones who own up to it on using some kind of corporal punishment. So I think the idea that most American parents aren't spanking at all is just not accurate. but let's see where they take this.
The biblical household was an economic engine, a welfare system, a school, a hospital, even a little church. All of that was capsulated into one. And when we dismantled it, we didn't liberate anyone in the process. We just shifted the burden to the state, and the state's failing. Now, as soon as you start talking about spanking, every modern mind has this horrifying text from Deuteronomy in their back pocket.
The infamous child stoning passage from Deuteronomy 21. And the parents shall say to the elders of his city, this our son is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. Then all the men of the city shall stone him to death with stones. So you shall purge the evil from your midst, and all Israel shall hear and fear. Deuteronomy 21, verses 20 and 21.
I mean, I don't think everybody has that in their mind. I think it's a very small subset of people that have that in their mind. I think theonomists might have that in their mind. And people who want a theocracy might have them in their mind. But most people are not thinking about that. They are thinking about the rod proverbs because these evangelical parenting books have circulated the rod proverbs. Most of them haven't circulated this because I think this is too far for even most Christian parents to accept, and it's criminal behavior. Like we just don't have families dealing out capital punishment in this way.
There's a similar verse in Exodus. Whoever curses his father or his mother shall be put to death. That's Exodus 21:17.
And the shrieks and the howls go up. Cruelty, child abuse, call CPS.
Most Christians, they want to skip over that text. Skeptics, they use that text to prove that the Bible is barbaric. What if that passage isn't barbaric at all? What if it's actually the key to understanding everything? The discipline, the household, maybe.
You guys. You guys, be serious. So it's important to note that the Wilson's train of thought is Christian dominionism out of the Reconstructionist movement, which, I mean, there's a lot of things that could be said about that. But for here, I will say a key piece of it is selectively choosing Old Testament law and restoring a theocracy as interpreted by the men leading this movement. So I think it's unsurprising that for these guys, this passage from Deuteronomy figures large. I think for most people, it does not. I think a lot of Christian parents, yes, think about the rod proverbs because they've been told it, because in all these parenting manuals, this has been presented as spanking. But I don't think many people think about this and think we should be stoning young adult sons. I mean, this is clearly about adult sons because there is drunkenness and gluttony cited in the verse. So it's not about small children. It's not about spanking. It is about theocratic law given to a community of ancient Israel. So how Christians approach those passages and their relevance for today is going to be hotly debated. Maybe not even hotly debated. It's going to be debated. Most parents don't consider this verse at all because they are dealing with like a tantrum with their child. Maybe they're dealing with a child unwilling to leave a play date, like Nancy said, or a child not willing to take a nap or eat their food. They're not thinking about stoning their preschooler in community. If they are, that's criminal behavior, that's child abuse, that's murder. But I want to pause here and note this because drawing this verse into their discussion about parenting young children does contribute to that, again, mindset of parent-child adversarial system. This verse in Deuteronomy is talking about the community of Israel, which was a collective community. And so trying to apply it to like individual family units in the American context is already going to be anachronistic. There's already going to be a problem there. Trying to apply it in the way that Wilson's community operates with like individual family units with a patriarch at the top is not what is happening there. I do not think Christian nationalism is the way of Jesus. I do not think a theocracy is something we should be considering or desiring. So it's kind of a non-starter for me. I think this is not a helpful verse to quote, but I'm curious to see how they're going to try and stretch it to make it about the gospel. Oh, goodness.
Even the gospel itself.
Jesus himself cited this law approvingly to condemn Pharisaical hypocrisy. He did it in Matthew 15. But it's not just an exegetical question. A major player in the reaction to the Wilsons is a modern movement called gentle parenting.
One website, who's run by a Baptist college president, explains this. Gentle parenting is an alternative approach to traditional child rearing with a foundation in mutual respect, empathy, understanding, and healthy boundaries. Sounds gay to me.
Great. So we're going to just have the high level of intellectual discourse that responds to something and says, sounds gay to me. So I'm glad Gabe Waterboy weighed in with that. They're talking about Flourishing Homes and Families, which is a ministry run by Dr. David and Amanda Erickson. Gentle parenting has become the favorite straw man for authoritarian Christians in this current moment. Regularly, every week, I see someone will send me a blog or a podcast. Is gentle parenting biblical? Can gentle parenting be biblical? It's become a convenient scapegoat, largely because gentle parenting is hard to define. They've pulled the Ericksons' definition of gentle parenting, though I think the Ericksons have moved away from that terminology because it's become such a meaningless term. Usually when people use it, they mean permissive parenting. They mean it as something negative to say, well, we all know what gentle parenting leads to. All the societal ills we're talking about, children with no boundaries, parents with no control or authority. And it leads to this very heavy either or dichotomy. Like either you spank or you have your children run amok. If you are a gentle parent, you have no control or no authority. And people who do follow practices of gentle parenting that would self-identify as gentle parenting, maybe alongside the definition they said, there are endlessly frustrated. You can see them in comments anytime this conversation comes up saying, you are describing permissive parenting, not gentle parenting. So what's interesting to me is typically when a podcast or somebody like Toby is bringing this up, they are judging what other people are choosing to do. I don't think Toby's probably ever considered gentle parenting. It's not of interest to him, but it's a problem for him that other parents might consider it. It's not just that Toby wants to spank his kids, it's that everybody else better be spanking their kids too. And maybe that says something to the high control nature of the community, the expectation for conformity and compliance. I'm not sure, but it's interesting that it bothers them that it even exists.
The website quotes an author who defines gentle parenting as, quote, approaching parenting situations with empathy for the child and trying to understand the reasonings behind their behavior, working together to change it positively, and accepting what cannot be changed, unquote. Notice that repeated word, empathy.
So empathy is a bad word in Moscow, right? Joe Rigney, who is, I think, the head of the college out there, has written the book. I think it used to be called Sin of Empathy. I think now it's called something else. It doesn't matter. They're always talking about the sin of empathy. And they love that Allie Beth Stuckey has a book, Toxic Empathy. They're always capitalizing on that because for them, empathy is a sin and they do not have a sense of like compassion, sympathy, empathy, that there could be any overlap there. Empathy is a bad word. So the fact that the Ericksons have empathy on their website probably is going to be a big deal for them.
That website says, quote, in today's culture, children's feelings and experiences are often dismissed, minimized, or ignored altogether.
I just want to notice the music again. Remember, we got the whimsical music for Nancy and Doug. We got kind of the concerned music for the children who were melting down. And here we have kind of the like danger music for David and Amanda Erickson, who are two of the kindest people you maybe could meet. Their book, and I'll put it up here, Flourishing Homes and Families, came out a couple of years ago. They've taken a lot of flack. They've become a target. A lot of people won't even, I highly doubt Toby has even read their book. They're probably just going to cherry pick from the website. But let's see what they say.
Together. That isn't true. Abigail Schreier, author of Bad Therapy.
Okay, I want to pause here because I see a lot of Christian conservatives who will pull out Abigail Schreier's book. And Kelsey and I'll link to it in the show notes. We talked about Abigail Schreier's book a couple years ago in an Instagram Live, if you're interested more in that. We also have an interview with Dr. David and Amanda Erickson. We also have an Instagram Live where we talk about, is gentle parenting biblical, et cetera, et cetera. So I will try and I'll link all that in the show notes. But it's worth noting that whatever Abigail is talking about in her book, I don't think is the norm in most Christian Christian families. I do not think it is the norm in Christian families for children's emotions and feelings to be listened to. The vast majority of resources see children's behavior in very binary terms. Is it sinful? Is it not sinful? And sin becomes this catch-all for any behavior a parent doesn't like. And if that happens, they are to be punished, usually through like verbal instruction, like a little mini sermon, and through rituals of corporal punishment to get the behavior up in line, usually to standards of instant, unquestioning obedience all the way right away with happy heart. So there is not a curiosity about a child's feelings or experience. And in fact, in a community like Doug Wilson's, there's not a curiosity about anyone's feelings or experience. They rely heavily on the nouthetic framework. So any unwanted emotion or feeling you're going to put off and you're going to put on the right one, right? This really is what Nancy is catechizing her daughter to in the beginning. Like that disappointment you feel is unacceptable. So you will choose to put on a smile. And so it's that kind of extrapolated out into any person's human emotions experience, which is why empathy is a bad word in this community and feelings do not have a place. And I'm going to skip through more of this video because they talk about kind of their favorite talking points.
No father in the home means no one with natural authority to discipline. No discipline means no formation of character. No character means no capacity to govern yourself or to serve others.
Okay, so again, I just want to trace a line of thought here. Like they have gone from assumptions that American households aren't spanking, to American households aren't disciplining, to American households are primarily gentle parenting. And all of those they have not supported. I would push back on all of those. I do not know how many parents would ascribe to gentle parenting, whatever is meant by that. Again, I would say what Abigail Schreier is talking about is not what Doug Wilson is preaching. Like when you read Abigail Schreier's book, she talks about authority of parents. She also talks a lot about autonomy of children. And in Doug Wilson and other high control religious communities, that is not the end goal. The end goal is not that a child would become autonomous and make their own decisions. The end goal is that a child would serve a generational legacy, that a child would be a testimony for God, that a child would be a Christian building the Christian nation, right? That is a divergence there that I think is important to note. So there's a lot of overlap with those resources in that a Christian will pick up Schreier's book and be like, this reaffirms my authoritarian approach. I knew I was right to question gentle parenting and gentler methods, but it still leaves them in this high control mindset that you find in a community like Wilson's. So I think that's important to note, even though that's kind of a really in the weeds kind of thing. But anyway, they're going to go on to talk about their vision for politics and society because it is wrapped up in this view of authority. It really is wrapped up in a view that there is a God-ordained authority and hierarchy that is patriarchal, and that if we can get this right, we could have a Christian nation and that would be good for everybody, and everybody who isn't the patriarch in this hierarchy should just learn to submit and comply because that's how it runs well. So it's always very interesting that the people at the top do not need to comply. In fact, Wilson's community refused to comply with things like mask and vaccine mandates, right? Like they don't ever have to comply to anyone, but the children, the women, and others who maybe don't share their beliefs and their vision for a Christian nation should still need to learn to comply. Anyway, so let's skip ahead to where I think they talk more about corporal punishment.
And that cycle repeats. Prisons fill, nursing homes fill, and the state expands, and then the bill comes due. And we can't afford it.
I'm just going to pop in here because here again, they're talking about these really increased stakes. This level of exploiting parental fears is really common in Christian parenting resources. So they've gone from, if you're maybe not thinking about spanking, you're probably not a Christian. You've probably fallen for gentle parenting, which is destroying the mental health and well-being of children. And this is going to be your outcome. No fathers, no discipline, no character, no control. Societal collapse is how they've subtitled this. So this is just the eternal, let alone the eternal stakes. So from the outside, this can look like who is really going to believe this? It's kind of like poorly edited with scary music and graphics. But I think for parents who are afraid because there's a lot you don't control in parenting, there's a lot you can't control in parenting, this becomes appealing because you think, well, okay, if I get this right, it can protect my child. It can keep bad things from happening to them. It can have good things happen for them. It becomes a very prosperity gospel promise. And it keeps parents operating by that when they have young children. It can look like it works and it can feel reassuring. it's not until it stops working that parents sometimes begin to question. When you have young children, a lot of times you don't question it. Or in the Wilsons case, when you have children, adult children, who are heavily invested in the family business. Because when this whole thing went viral with Nancy, they did do a sit down with their adult children to kind of be like, let's all talk. You guys are the proof that it worked. Look how successful. Look, you all love the Lord. And a lot of their followers who would be defending Nancy in the comments would say that and be like, well, I'm going to go for their advice because look, all their children are walking with the Lord. And I think it's important to note that no one knows what goes on behind closed doors, right? But Doug Wilson has been very straightforward that when he was a child, his father told him if any of his children left the faith, he would step down from ministry, and that Doug Wilson told his own children that. So from the beginning, from the earliest days, there's been a lot of pressure on everyone in that family to conform because their entire livelihood depends on it. Furthermore, they all as adults now benefit from that. They're all employed in Doug Wilson's ministry. That's their livelihood. That's their income. So it'd be very costly to make any other choice but comply. And so I think that needs to be part of the conversation. If people want to trot that out as evidence, we need to talk about the vested interest the Wilsons altogether have in presenting that picture to everyone. And it's worth listening to others in the community who don't have that vested interest, who followed the rules, and it did not work in their family. It destroyed their family. It was destructive. It hurt people. It led to abuse. It led to broken relationships, broken marriages, broken families. And they are out there too, and they followed that advice, and it didn't work for them. So is it that user error? Is it that it only worked for the Wilsons, or could it be that the advice is flawed? Could it be that parenting is more complex, that human relationships are more complex than plug and play? Like if you get the patriarchal vision right, you can guarantee all outcomes. Is it just that over the past 50 years, all the other parenting experts who were offering this to Christian families just were slightly wrong because they were telling people the same thing? So if you're pointing at societal collapse right now, like, what was Dobson's advice wrong, or did parents just not do it right? Was Ezra's advice wrong? Was Wilson's advice from 30 years ago wrong? Because he was advising families too. So it kind of all falls apart when you begin to say, you guys aren't saying something new. People have been saying this a long time. It's not theoretical anymore. We have the evidence that this just doesn't work. Anyway, let's keep going.
If children are not required to honor father and mother, life, marriage, property, and honesty will not be long honored either.
Okay, so this goes back to the original Nancy clip, right? Because it's a fallacy to say that if you don't spank, children won't honor their parents. But in this community, that is what is presented. You see the inversion of that is presented. Like you have to spank your children into honoring you. Otherwise they won't. Like it's almost as though it's never crossed their mind that by building a mutually respectful relationship, that by building connection, that by building trust, that by building consistency and reliability, that could create young adults and adults who honor their parents. It only comes through top-down force and coercion, right? So this underlying belief that from the beginning says, oh, my child didn't want to leave play date. That's a threat to my parental authority. I need to spank that honor into her, has led to a whole worldview that says if we don't have spanking in our homes, that just the breakdown of the family. And it makes me quite sad for the people who have gotten caught up in this community because it's simply not so. Maybe it helps to hear from other Christians to say that's simply not so. Like you can build a respectful relationship with your children. You can build a relationship where children honor their parents without relying on spanking them into that kind of honor.
So we have toxic empathy in the courts because we have had it in the home.
Let's say you don't set down rules for your child. Let's say you always solicit their opinion. You always worry about their feelings. You just hug them when they're in distress. You never punish them when they punch their little sibling, right?
Okay, again, this is the either or extreme. The options before parents are not spank or nothing, spank or no rules, spank or no boundaries. I would even envision that for people who advocate for gentle parenting, they are not advocating for no rules and no boundaries. So these straw mans are problematic because I think the people listening are kind of swept along with the music and this kind of messy dialogue from one point to the next without having like the space to think critically and think, what are my choices as a parent? What is my freedom here?
Now you're going to send them off to school where they have to obey the teacher's rules.
Right.
And they won't be able to do it. So tell me what ended up the most.
People in families in Wilson's community are not sending their kids off to public school. They're homeschooling or sending them off to Wilson's school, which at least in years past still had on the books that teachers could spank students. So this is like a made up problem in Wilson's community. Again, it's a way to be insider-outsider dynamic. It's a way to reinforce authoritarian parenting that the community already buys into, right? They're not really flirting with the gentle parenting in Wilson's world. They're not flirting with not spanking, but they are drawing in families that maybe would consider other methods, and they're thinking, oh no, now am I a Christian if I don't do this? Or will my child be completely unboundering if I don't spank? Because again, as Abigail's presenting here, the option presented is, oh, no rules or spank your children. It's simply not so. Okay, Toby and Knox are about to go through some Proverbs here, and I want to talk about them with them.
The Bible is clear. Whoever spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him is diligent to discipline him. Proverbs 13:24.
Again, note the grammar here. This is an observation about the wise parents will not neglect to discipline. They don't spare the rod. And you have a choice when you come to these Proverbs. Are you going to interpret them literally, like I talked earlier? There aren't really great options for applying them literally, or metaphorically. Is this about parental authority or parental discipline? Wherever you land, you're doing interpretive work to get to spank my child on their bottom in a private place and hug afterwards, right? Like the formula that's offered to parents. So you got to interpret them in some way. And I would suggest that there's tremendous freedom for the Christian parent to consider what approaches to discipline they're going to adopt. Do they align with the life and teaching of Jesus? Do they align with the one anothering verses that are applied to everyone, even including our children as our neighbors, as our brothers and sisters in Christ? And do they align with the direct instruction given to Christian parents? Do not provoke or embitter your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Now, if a parent chooses to spank, they got to own that. They don't get to shuffle that off onto the Bible because there is not a requirement for them to do that. The wisdom for parents here is that wise parents will not neglect to discipline. Let's see what else they're going to say.
And here's what they'll never quote.
Do not withhold discipline from a child. If you strike him with a rod, he will not die. You will save his soul from Sheol. Proverbs 23:14.
Actually, I hear people quote this all the time. This is one that I get all the time from people who want to defend spanking. So let's talk about it. The main imperative here, again, on theme, is do not withhold discipline. That is the focus of the proverb. Do not withhold discipline. The second part, if you strike him with a rod, he will not die. You will save his soul from Sheol. Okay, so my question is, if they want to read this literally, do they really read this as a prosperity gospel promise that if you spank your child with a rod, whatever that means, you will guarantee their eternal salvation? Is that the case? Because I think we can easily disprove that. So does that mean that scripture is not reliable? Or does it mean we are looking for a prosperity gospel promise here and there isn't one? Because I know plenty of adults who were spanked as children who have rejected the faith entirely. So I don't think this is like a magical how to secure salvation for your child with this verse. I don't think it's a magical how-to. Let's see what else they say about it to see maybe how they get some more clues on how they're interpreting this.
14.
The rod doesn't destroy your child. It actually saves them.
Solomon answered dental therapy objections nearly 3,000 years ago. If you spank your child, he will not die. You will save his soul from hell.
That's how powerful that tool that God gives us in Scripture.
I still don't have a clear sense of how they're interpreting this verse. If they genuinely believe if you spank your child, that's a ticket to salvation, like that just seems bananas to me that anyone would stand behind that. It contradicts New Testament teaching on salvation through faith alone. So I can't think that's what they mean. They don't go into it anymore. I'm left, I guess, to conclude that Toby and Waterboy and Knox all believe that if they spank their child, they will guarantee their salvation. That seems very strange to me. So, okay, if someone hears that and skips over the questions that I have and others might have and says, well, okay, I better be doing this. The question really is how and to whom, because a lot of the broad Proverbs are talking about sons. So are we saying parents should it's only their sons that they can save through spanking? Then why are Christian families spanking daughters? Like why did Nancy spank her daughter? If she's following these literally, these are just for sons. And in fact, I would argue that the words in the Proverbs seem to indicate young adult sons, and that would really map with ancient Near East practice we see reflected in Deuteronomy, right? These are adult or young adult sons in rebellion that are kind of threats to the community, very different than toddlers and preschoolers. Like, I'm not a theonomist. I don't think we should operate by Old Testament law, but they're not talking about stoning toddlers and preschoolers. They are not talking about striking the bottoms of 4-year-old girls. They are not. That is not what these verses are about. So we're already doing a lot of interpretive work and selective application. So I don't find it compelling when people bring this out, because the clear wisdom here is do not withhold discipline, not spank your child into heaven. That is out of alignment with the rest of Scripture. It's nonsensical and it's dangerous. It's very dangerous advice, because when you tell parents without any clarity that this is a powerful tool that will save their soul, you really escalate the stakes. And so then when you throw in sin language, if like a toddler having a meltdown is perceived as sin, it is how you end up with all-day spanking sessions. It is how you end up with parents killing their children because they believe them to be evil or sinful, or they're worried that their eternal well-being is at stake. So this is incredibly dangerous and irresponsible advice, particularly because they don't go on to explain, except to be like, well, that just shows that this is God's powerful tool that you need to use.
But all of this assumes something that modern culture has rejected: the fact that parents have the authority to do any of this at all. The family is the seminary of all other societies, the seedbed, the place where everything begins at.
I do think lessons learned in childhood are formative, but I think that should be sobering to parents. I do not think we should be like, all right, now we get to fashion the family and the society and the nation according to our theocratic ideals. I think it should sober us to be like, our daily interactions with these human beings that bear the image of God, that are loved by, knit together, known by God, that have been entrusted to our care for a short period of time, that could impact the trajectory of their life. That should sober us a great deal and should really quiet down the ease with which people like this are like, well, you probably should just hit them, because that's the powerful way to get them to do what you want.
Where do people learn manners? To respect authority, to work hard and keep their word, delay gratification, to sacrifice comfort for duty. The family.
All the images that they're showing in the background and these things you're saying, I think most parents would say, yeah, that's good. And I want that. Notice they're not showing anyone spanking. They're showing a parent connected to their child, teaching them duty, teaching them how to work, teaching them how to save, etc. Like, these do not require spanking.
If you don't nip your kids' sins while they're in diapers, while they're just starting to walk around, before they're 10 years old, whatever, you will get an awful civilization grow out of that sin. That little tantrum will grow up into a man that has no control over his emotions.
And that will turn into porn problems, laziness, or violence and cruelty, and eventually, yes, national.
Okay, so this is entirely theoretical. Who knows what they mean by nip, and who knows what they mean by sin? I mean, I know what they mean. By nip, they mean spanking. By sin, they mean any behavior a parent doesn't like. So again, they're showing us a lot of images of children having a hard time. Thankfully, they are not showing us parents hitting their children. But according to Nancy's framework, you should spank your child into the correct emotion that they can then act out for you. That is not necessarily teaching someone to control their emotions. That's teaching someone to suppress their emotions. Again, I think this is a lot of straw manning. I think if they want to point to criminal behavior or to people who use pornography, I'm sure if you talk to them, I highly doubt you will find them saying they were not spanked. Again, majority of American parents still own up to spanking. This has long been a norm in American culture.
Disaster.
So what does biblical discipline actually look like? The internet, they've created a caricature of spanking, a blackface version of it.
For example, when my wife and I went through foster care training, spanking was listed with other forms of cruelty right next to kicking, spitting, hitting, slapping.
Yeah, spanking is hitting. Christians call it swatting. They call it switching. They have all kinds of euphemisms. No, it is by definition hitting. It's an adult hitting a child on their bottom, either with their hand or with a tool. That is what it is.
When we told one social worker that we objected to that characterization, she asked us how we spanked our young biological children.
Okay, before we get here, I'm going to guess, because these are the made-up rules that generations of Christians have been told are the good way to spank. It's going to involve taking a child somewhere private, just with the parent and the child, telling them how many hits they're going to get, telling them about their sin, pulling down their pants, spanking them on the bottom with either bare hand or implement. You get both. But people feel really strongly. There's many people offering lots of different implements. You got to do that. Afterward, you got to pray. You got to hug afterward. And then you got to be reconciled and you got to act reconciled. And those are the rules Christian families have been given that somehow make hitting children into compliance magically into something godly. Let's see what Toby says.
I explained, well, we just really briefly, we know if a child has been disobedient and disrupting the fellowship of the home, we take the child somewhere private. In our house, it was usually the bathroom. It could be a bedroom. Explain to them really quickly what they've done. Tell them, you're going to have, this number of swats. Usually it was like, 2 or 3 most of the time. And administer the swats. We would comfort them really quickly. And then we would pray together and ask God's forgiveness for the sin.
That would be the child asking forgiveness. Just going to note, that's the child asking forgiveness for the sin. So sin language is wrapped up in this. Whatever has happened, the child is atoning for their sin somehow.
And then we would make sure that relationships were restored. So, if they'd hit their brother or sister or their mom or whatever, or said no or threw a fit, they'd go ask for forgiveness of the person. And we make sure that all the fellowship was restored. And I remember the social worker looking at us a little bit confused. And she said, that actually sounds constructive.
Again, I'm not sure if they are really tracking why people are confused or objecting. They're probably confused why someone is in foster care training owning up to this.
The whole point is restoration of fellowship. Sin destroys that fellowship. And when you have kids in the house, you're going to have a lot of sin. When you have a lot of young kids, you're going to have a lot of sin. And you want to restore that fellowship.
If you are in a framework where fellowship has to be forced, then you are going to rely on coercion and threats of discipline. This says something about their view of God, whether they will admit it or not. And it's a view of God that says you are in relationship with God only out of fear of punishment. That is why you're in relationship with God, because it's not connection, it's not attachment, it's not the invitation of his love. It's because you're afraid to be punished. And that is why you act the way you do as a Christian, is so you don't get more punished, more punishment and suffering. And so this kind of plays out in a small way in the family home. Okay. Sin becomes a catch-all for anything a parent doesn't like. It could be a toddler throwing food from a high chair, could be defined a sin. Saying no, not wanting to leave a play date early. All of these things become defined a sin. Theologically speaking, this is really sloppy. Sin does not mean any behavior someone doesn't like or something that bothers you or inconveniences you. Like, there are precise theological terms for what we mean by original sin, what we mean by the culpability and guilt that comes from sin. Theologians have different ways of coming at this, but this is very sloppy when you start saying, well, anything and everything is sin, not just because it is like imprecise, but also it catechizes people in a sloppy way that falls apart. It is inadequate from a level of theodicy, explaining suffering and evil in the world. It is supremely individualistic. It's very influenced by piety and Puritanism. It's not a universal conversation that you could have throughout the global church and the historic church. So it's a limited, narrow view. It's an impoverished view, theologically speaking, I would say. But it just comes with all this Christianese. So everyone is like, oh, who sinned in this moment? This parenting moment that's hard with a child melting down. Somebody must have sinned because it's hard. Like either the parent has sinned or the child has sinned. And That's not so. Some things are just hard. Growing up is hard. Growing into maturity is hard. A child's developmental needs require patience and long suffering. They require the fruit of the Spirit in the parent. It might have nothing to do with sin. And even if it does, to place the parent in the role of the Holy Spirit to somehow suss that out and adjudicate that is a remarkable landing place, but it's very normative in these resources. And I think if we could remove some of that over spiritualized language, we really have laid bare basic conditioning and behavioristic parenting. It's just dressed up with a lot of language around sin. What the podcast hosts are failing to see, I have no idea if they'll watch this. If you have to force restored fellowship, you have lost the plot along the way. Fellowship is ruptured when a caregiver, when a trusted adult hits a child. And I really would invite parents and others to think about what this experience is like from a child's perspective. You don't have to call it empathy if that word frightens you, but just use your brain to think about what this is like whether they've done something willfully wrong, whether they didn't have the capacity to control themselves, whether they shouted out no before they could think, whether they couldn't hide their disappointment at a play date, whatever. The all-powerful parent in their life has decided they need a spanking, has taken them somewhere private, has told them they're going to get a spanking, has stripped them probably bare, has hit their bottom in a way that causes pain, and then has required them to hug them afterward. For the child, the relationship ruptured when the parent hit them. And you are indeed training them to expect relationships to go a certain way. You're grooming them in a number of ways. You're saying it's okay for an adult to take a child somewhere private. It's okay for an adult to hurt your body in a private place so long as they say God wants it. And afterward, you got to be restored fellowship with that person. You got to act nice around that person. You got to hug that person. When you think about this downstream, when you listen to the survivors of abuse who've come out of Doug Wilson's community, you see some mapping points where you see victims of abuse who were not able to come forward because authority figures took them somewhere private, hurt their body. There was restored fellowship. There's a lot of manipulative language around protecting ministry, protecting relationship, protecting reputation. It really does children a disservice. And I would love it if parents would stop thinking in the short term of like, does this give me immediate compliance when I want my kid to leave from the play date? And start to think about the long-term messaging that's happening here, that I'm teaching this human being to hide their feelings, to only say yes to an authority figure, to act out different feelings, to not trust their own intuitive responses that may be God-given emotions that would warn them of danger, etc. It's very short-sighted.
And God gave us the tool of discipline. God gave us the tool of spanking to help bring about repentance.
No, we don't get to shuffle this off on God. American Christians have widely embraced the tool of spanking.
You can sometimes sort of put it off, and it's getting worse and getting worse. And then like you got a bad attitude or just fussiness or whatever. And then if you finally realize, oh, what this kid needs, they just need the love of a spank. And then you go and you spank them and they come out and it's like the sun came out.
So yeah, Wilson has said something very similar about spanking one of his own daughters long ago. So I think Toby's just pulling on his mentor's language here, even talking about the sun coming out. This is really common in resources, talk about how much children are asking for a spanking or need a spanking. No, and as though like the parent is kind of unwilling to do it. You'll sometimes hear people be like, oh, I don't want to have to do this. This hurts me more than it hurts you. That is all parents trying to shuffle the ownership of their choice off onto someone else, in this case, onto the child. Like, no, you are choosing to spank. You are choosing to hit your child. You are choosing this method of discipline. That is on you as a parent to own. And in this moment, that is on you, despite the good data we have that says it is ineffective, it causes harm, it causes all kinds of damages, it enables abuse. You're still choosing it. Eyes wide open about that. So that is on you. That is not on the child.
Failure to discipline in a firm way allows for sin to grow in a home. And that's what creates a truly toxic environment.
This is really simple.
I don't know where they're getting this footage. I imagine they don't have consent from these children if this is just general footage. The way that children are portrayed in these resources and books, it's through anecdotes in visual media. It's like this with clips of children having a hard time or children melting down, is really unfortunate. I think it is dehumanizing to children, whatever people are intending. It films them without their consent in a difficult moment. I don't know if these are authentic moments or if they told their children to act this way. It invites the audience to stand in judgment. Like a parent, if you go to a park and see a parent and a child having a hard time, you don't know if they're being spanked at home or not spanked at home. But always experts will weigh in and be like, oh, it's because they're not parenting my way, the right way. And it's just an exacting and pretty ruthless measure, and probably not the measure we would like to be measured by if someone was witnessing that. In Christian resources in particular, this framing of children and their developmental behavior or their misbehavior or whatever behavior a parent doesn't want as a problem that threatens parental authority is really common. It also raises the stakes. It's not about helping a child develop from immaturity to maturity. It's not about recognizing that for whatever reason, God has designed babies to be immature and to need to develop. It is sort of an expectation for behavior that will meet a parent's desires and goals that will really make life easier for a parent. And if a child's not able to meet that instantly and in the way the parent wants, it's a problem, right? If Nancy goes to pick up her daughter from a play date and her daughter's not happy to see her, that's like a logistic problem for Nancy. And maybe it's a little bit embarrassing to Nancy. She wants that other mother to see her daughter excited to see her, right? So she's going to condition her to do that. That is the solution offered in high control Christian communities. You through the threat of punishment and through the coercion of corporal punishment, you can get the outcome you want. So your day can go smoother, so your child can respond, it can look cheerful to you, so that it can seem like things are going along cheerfully. Like when you look at your children, they appear to be cheerful, and that can feel better for you. It's interesting that it rarely asks for a parent to grow in maturity. This kind of like instant compliance, right? In this moment that they're showing us of children melting down, we see some glimpses of parents, but we don't get a sense that, oh, these moments are difficult for parents as well. They're triggering parents. They're stirring things up in parents. Parents are often seeing this as a threat to their authority. Maybe it's pulling on things from their own childhood and they're activated in ways they don't fully understand. But this is going to be portrayed as like, we all know we don't want this
stuff. When the family produces men and women of discipline and integrity and service, society flourishes. And when the family produces narcissists who follow their own hearts and resent correction, society collapses.
Oh, more society stuff. Okay, I'm going to fast forward.
Spanking means that you need to get your heart right first, because the kids can sense the hypocrisy. And so you need to deal with your own sin before you even go spank your child.
Again, I would like people listening to envision what this is like for a child, where their frustrated parent is upset with them because they had a bad attitude. Say, let's pull Toby's example. And then they know a spanking's coming and their parent's like, I need to go pray first and get my heart right before I come spank you. It just adds religious trauma to what's going on in the home. It just messes people up because it involves God in the parent's choice to spank, and says it also makes a parent feel like they have God's blessing and that they act as an agent of God. Some of these resources directly say that, and that's just an incredibly dangerous place for a parent who is worried about eternal stakes, who sees everything as sin, feels like they're an agent of God, has gone and prayed to make sure they're doing it right, to then unleash corporal punishment on a child. It's again an irresponsible and dangerous message.
Hebrews 12:6 says that God disciplines us. He scourges us, and the word there means that he strikes us or whips us because we are his children, because he loves us.
So they are talking about this one. It's often translated chastises. It's mastigoi. And it comes from the root to discipline, which elsewhere in the New Testament is translated scourge or flog. It's only translated, you can see only a couple usages in the New Testament that already should give a little flag up there, because these are narrative portions that are talking about a person being flogged. This is the Septuagint, chastises is the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament of this verse, which is Proverbs 3, 11, and 12. So if we go there in the Hebrew, we see that it's translated reproves. Reprove is a word that has a wide range of meanings, which is typically verbal reproof. So to jump to this gets used a lot as a like, oh, but in the New Testament, God scourges us, so we are to scourge our children. No, the original proverb is about reproof. In any case, this passage is not a parenting instruction.
This is the gospel in action. The gospel is not merely words to think or hear. The gospel is lived out.
No. Ooh, let's not distort the gospel here. Let's look at this passage, though, a little more carefully, because this gets pulled out a lot because it talks about discipline, talks about earthly fathers. So let's talk about it briefly. Hebrews is a book written to the early church undergoing immense suffering and persecution. You'd see this in Hebrews 11. It ends with martyrdom, death. They're undergoing immense suffering and persecution. So it's written to offer them encouragement and hope. Hebrews 12 opens with this picture of Jesus being raised from the dead. Goes on to offer encouragement to those who are enduring suffering that the God who raises the dead, who overcame death, can use even the evil and suffering and sin you're experiencing for your maturation and growth. That's a really different thing than saying God is the author of evil and death and suffering. There's a theological distinction there. Also, the imagery of earthly fathers here is given to it's a using something from our experience as humans to help us understand a greater mystery about God. It's a lens for which we can see something about God. It is not taking our earthly experiencing of fatherhood and placing that on God and saying, well, that must be God is like, because this is how earthly fathers interact. That distinction is important because there's a lot of, the Bible uses a lot of imagery from our earthly experience to teach us something about God. When we instead invert that and say that our earthly understanding then defines God, we are in sketchy theological territory. Anyway, here, this is not a parenting passage. So the comfort offered to people here is that God can use the evil and suffering they're experiencing for their maturation and growth, for their discipleship. So to take this and then say, human fathers should inflict suffering, pain on their children, that's the only way they can disciple them, is a misuse of this passage. Parents are not God. Tracking this over to spanking because of this understanding of scourging is problematic because it's saying something about the importance of discipline, granted. It is not saying something about methodology, or else you're talking about scourging children the way Jesus was scourged by Pontius Pilate. That's the other usage of this word here for scourging. It's one of the other usages. So no, to try and apply it that way means you are suggesting that we should scourge, which was like the extreme Roman penalty. That is not what the author of Hebrews is saying in this passage, that parents should scourge their children. Parents who read it that way and land at spanking are already doing a lot of interpretive work to justify spanking. This is not a passage about spanking. It's also instructive to see that when the early church does talk about church discipline, they don't rely on scourging, even though synagogues at the time did. Paul was scourged. Some of the apostles were scourged. That is not something the early Christians chose. They departed from that. Their choice for church discipline was excommunication. It was nonviolent. So I think that's worth noting. If you want to pull all this in and make this a framework, it's worth noting that the early Christians did not choose to replicate that. So for families to draw on this and try and replicate that, they're departing from that example. Okay. Oh my gosh, this is getting exhaustive. So let's see what else possibly they can have to.
And enacted when parents imitate God's fatherly love. This is how we know we belong to God. This is how we know God is our Father.
Unfortunately, for a lot of people, these spanking scripts become theological role plays, and they do believe that this is the gospel lived out and enacted. It does say something about what they believe God is like. It reflects a belief that God is kind of there, that any suffering or evil they experience is probably punishment for something they've done wrong. So it can really lead to people down the road if they experience loss, if they experience bereavement, if they experience a physical ailment, they believe it's because of their sin, which is not in alignment with what Jesus said when he healed the man born blind. Neither you nor your parents sinned. This you've experienced so that the glory of God might be displayed in your life. So it leads to some really wonky theological places. But I will agree with him here that these deep commitments to spanking say something about theological commitments and the way people have experienced God. And they really do believe that God is like this. I would strongly push back on this and say this is these theological role plays around spanking have a lot more in common with pagan religions than with the God we see incarnate in Jesus Christ. In that they have people trying to learn a transactional view, like I need to get it right or wrong in order to secure good or avoid harm, right? That's a pagan way of interacting with a deity. And it's also a really pagan view to have a view of God that demands atoning, painful punishment, right? This is the theologies of child sacrifice in the ancient Near East. And the God of Israel said, I am not that way. You are not to blend with those religions. You are not to take on those practices. And so when we kind of muddle that all up and throw around Christianese terms, we are in shaky theological territory. And I think we really need to be much more precise. If we are going to start talking about theological concepts and try and tether them to the parenting methodologies of our day, we need to be much more theologically precise.
Hebrews also says that this discipline must be painful.
No. This passage is written to people undergoing painful experiences to offer them encouragement, to say that the God who raises the dead will use the painful things they are experiencing for their maturation and growth. It is not saying you need to make discipline painful for your children.
We have a rising generation of kids who have received the most therapy, the most medication.
Okay, so on and on they're going to go with this. And here's the thing. A lot of this comes down to, are you believing discipline equals spanking? Because I think most Christian parents who reject spanking are not arguing for boundaryless parenting or no correction or no discipline or no instruction. So that is a strong.
So seek first the kingdom of God.
Spank your kids. Saved America.
They were excited. They really wanted that last banger of a line. I think that's why they called it that. They really wanted to get that in. Okay, well, this was exhausting, and I really do not like that there are people like this serving the same message up for another generation of families. They did not talk at all about abuse, and I want to close by noting that, because what is the takeaway from a message like this for a man who listens to this? Because they talk in this parts I skipped over, they talk all about how this is like men need to take on their responsibility to spank more. Who listens to this and thinks, I need to spank more in my home. What does that look like? Because I heard from people who grew up in homes where parents, were inspired to shore up discipline, or read some of these books. And they all talk about this. Oh, when things get raggedy, when you don't want to do this as a parent, you need to take control and do it. And they sit their kids down, they apologize for not spanking enough, and then they do it. Doug Wilson calls it a reign of terror. Elizabeth Kruger of Raising Godly Tomatoes talks about all day, kind of staking your kid near you, spanking him for every infraction till you restore order. Ginger Hubbard talks about it. They all talk about it. What it ends up happening is enabling abuse, because all of this happens behind closed doors, and you have given parents no actual functional tools. In this whole 25 minutes, the only practical advice they've given is reading between the lines. It's Toby talking about his experience of how they spanked. The rest of it is just it's important to spank. It's important to spank so you can save America. It's important to spank so your kids don't become threats to the moral fabric of society. It's important to spank so you don't be embarrassed in the grocery store. It's important to spank so all these things. So a parent walks away being like, oh my gosh, I have to spank. And in a moment where they are living and engaging another human being in development, any moment of conflict becomes a moment to spank then. There's no other tools given. And it will only escalate because the stakes have now been inflated so high with biblical authority, with apocalyptic societal collapse, with eternal stakes about saving your child's soul, that it really will escalate. This is incredibly dangerous. So I want to talk about that because Toby and Knox and Waterboy may feel good about getting clicks. At this point, they have only 1,800 views on this. I'm 1,801. So I'm actually pleased to see that low number. They have 173 likes. So I think perhaps 173 people walk away from this newly determined to spank Borer. That's not boundaried. Wilson and others talk about avoiding the notice of CPS, not doing this in public. This leaves parents struggling behind closed doors. It leaves mothers and fathers feeling like the burden on them is to somehow secure cheerful, instant compliance in all things to control the hearts of their children. Impossible things, superhuman things to do. These are not possible things to do. And this is not how God relates to his children. They disobey. His children rebel. So even if you're trying to put yourself in a position of God and parent like him, this idea that you can punish into a child wanting to connect to you, happy to see you, into joyful relationship with you is incredibly misguided. And it will betray families. It will leave parents betrayed and it will leave children betrayed. It's incredibly dangerous for the children in these families because the community normalizes it. So there's no one that they can go to. It's why survivors of abuse have such a hard time being heard in these communities. And then for the parents, they are training themselves into certain expectations and they're shortchanging themselves. All these opportunities where they could be learning other skills about human development, where they could be getting curious about their own heart issues, the areas that they have to grow and mature in, they are overriding it with expectations for instant compliance. And what it does is it sets up families down the road for estrangement because it won't hold. It won't hold. It only works. The only way it works is when you have adult children who want to fold into this same vision for high control religion and benefit from being in the same community. Then it can have the appearance of working, though it really invites the question if there is the capacity at all for actual authentic connection. Even if the compliance piece holds, can you have authentic connection if everyone has been forced to connect and be cheerful under threat of punishment? And I think that's the big betrayal waiting for parents who opt into this because it's short-sighted and you don't get those years back. You don't get to go back and rebuild connection and safe attachment and secure attachment in the toddler years, in the preschool years, in the childhood years. You don't get that back. You can work for repair. You can repent. Some families I've heard from, it has allowed them to move forward with health, to revisit this and to talk about it. But you didn't get to know what could have been yours. And makes me so mad to see advice like this happening because we've had it for 50 years. We've heard about the wreckage. The best case scenario you get is adult children who were like, I was spanked and I turned out fine and it wasn't traumatic for me. That's the best case scenario you get. A lot of other people detailing incredible destructive impact, everything from self-harm, suicidality, from sexual dysfunction, from experiencing spanking as sexual abuse to that creating sexual appetites and sexual dysfunction later down the road, increased anxiety and paranoia. So it's a gamble that I really would encourage parents to think of it as a gamble, because all of this that Toby and Knox and Waterboy are saying, you are trusting their advice and gambling with the children the Lord has entrusted to your care for a short time. You're gambling with their relationships. and for all their anecdotal advice. I will see it and raise you with the countless experiences I've heard from people where it has destroyed their family relationships. They carry deep regrets. This is from parents. They carry deep regrets. They wish they would have never done it. They are angry that they were not given other tools, that they were not freed up to choose other tools. And adult children reflecting back, who carry all manner of harm as well as religious trauma, who had nothing to do with Christianity as a result. Learn from other families who've walked this road before you. It need not be theoretical. You need not spank on faith. You need not take these guys' word for it. You can talk to the people who have implemented it and see how it turned out for them. Anyway, I'm going to throw a ton of links in my show notes, link to our book if you want to know. It's not all about spanking. We really do just have one chapter on spanking. But I think you will find it powerful to just consideration of a lot of these promises. I'm going to link to a downloadable bundle I've done that has some one sheets on Hebrews 12 and on the Proverbs. I will link to the playlists in my channel that talk about this. I have so much material on this that you can find that maybe will be helpful to you. Thank you for hanging in there with me. I would like to say this will be the last time I'll talk about spanking, but it won't be. It won't be, because there are current crops of Christian influencers who not only have found it lucrative to talk about this gentle parenting, biblical parenting false dichotomy, but we are seeing a cultural swing along the parenting pendulum back to more authoritarian techniques. It's why you hear headlines about FAFO parenting. It's why you have Abigail Schreier's book being a bestseller. This always happens throughout human history. It's going to swing back. And I think we're going to see Christian influencers jumping right on that and becoming more overt and verbal about the corporal punishment of children. So given that, I think we need other Christians becoming more vocal and verbal and saying, no, we reject that. That is not a particularly Christian message. Here are the problems with it, and to invite people to a different way forward. I'm also going to include in my show notes, in our book, we don't offer recommendations. We don't set ourselves up to give parenting advice, because I don't think there's one size fits all parenting advice. I think you have tremendous freedom as a Christian parent to know your own personality, to know the children entrusted to you, to study them, to take into account their personality, your unique season, your unique need, and learn about parenting methodology, to learn about child development, and to consider methods that suit you for a specific season, that suit your children, to change your mind, all number of things. We do have in the back of our book an appendix that is like a metric to help you evaluate different parenting resources to see if those are ones you want to listen to and learn from. Anyway, we don't give parenting advice, because that would be setting ourselves up and saying our experience is normative for everyone. And what we found helpful, everyone must find helpful. And we reject that. That's part of what we're tackling in this book. But I understand that people are looking for advice. So I will say, as a mom of 6, as a pastor's wife, the one parenting resource I still recommend to people in my parish, the one Christian parenting resource, is Connected Families. I love it. They weave together biblical principles. They weave together brain science and child development. They offer personalized coaching. They have a lot of freebie resources. They have a wonderful streaming course called Discipline That Connects. So it's not, remember, your options aren't spanking or no discipline. Like, there are ways to discipline that are ethical, that are in alignment with the one anothering principles of Scripture, that are nonviolent. I love their parenting framework. The foundation is you are safe with me. It is connection, establishing safety. You are loved no matter what. You are called and capable, and you are responsible for your actions. So some of the things people like Toby and Knox and Waterboy are worried about, there are Christian alternatives that don't rely on thinking that do take that into account. So check that out if that's of interest to you. I will link it to you. Let me know if you have any questions. Now I have to edit this. You all have to edit this.